And welcome back to the castle, everybody. This is Nightsaber Z42, and today I'm going to show you what I have come up with for the capitals from Spectacular Settlements. For this one, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with this one, and I kind of approached the rolls in a different way. So instead of just rolling straight down each of the options, I just I made a pool of the rolls for a specific section, like the districts. I just did a straight pool, and then I allocated those rolls to what I felt would actually be right for that situation. With that being said, I did not roll for some of these entries, of which was this first one, which is the Origins, which I knew that this was going to be in my Dragonborn area of my world. And in my world, Dragonborn are very religious. They're kind of like the clerics, like full-on clerics in this world. And they are tasked with finding the dragons that pretty much left them a long time ago. So they're always going out on crusades to find where the dragons went, or if there are any still alive, and sort of this. So they're very religious. And so this capital, Drakenfall Peak, is actually a holy city. And what makes this one very interesting, as you'll see as we go through this, this is actually a floating city in the valley, or in a valley type region. So I had to really think about restraints within those limits, that this is going to be a floating city and it's actually anchored to the ground, so it's actually stationary. So as such, I chose to have this keep, or this capital, old. So it's between 300 and 1,000 years old. I haven't quite decided what that would be. And in fact, it's probably going to be between 300 and 500, because the fortress that I made right afterwards is actually about 500 years old. And there's some significance between this capital and that keep. The size is medium, which is about supporting of 50,000 people, which gives us a +0 to the number of districts roll. And as I said before, this is actually a floating city over a valley. So one of the things that we introduced in the cities portion of the book were things that were outside the capital. Now this is actually a floating city, so there's really not a whole lot going outside of it. So what I did, instead of having it within the city itself, the floating city, there's actually another portion of the city underneath it. And it's kind of like a small settlement, like a camp really. But here we have some farming, which is the livestock version. There's some barrows that are quite significant to the Dragonborn of this specific area. And there's also a training ground. As I said, these guys are going to be clerics and paladins, so they have to have a place to train, especially since in my game, the Dragonborn were actually at war with each other, so it makes sense that they would be capable warriors. For Stewardship, I did not roll. I knew that this needed to be disciplined, especially since there's going to be a lot of paladins coming from this place, a lot of clerics, so it didn't make sense to have neglected or anything below managed, and so I opted to go for disciplined. For the general condition, I have rolled impressive, and that was actually a straight roll I did there, especially since I had a +5 for my stewardship. And for fortifications, I opted for heavily fortified. Actually, I just rolled that one. I got heavily fortified. It made sense that I actually rolled that. If I had rolled unfortified, it would have been very hard to explain the fact that it was a floating city, because the floating city part actually does provide fortifications in of itself. So I'm actually quite glad I rolled heavily fortified. And I actually wrote here, the capital is a floating city with only 1 or 2 ways to actually get inside, instead of actually having walls going around it. Next we have the market square. I actually I put an X here because the market square was not affected by the priority. We got spacious, so there's room for lots of vendor stalls. Merchant overflow is monitored, and the vendor stall acquisition is actually by sponsored referral only, which I thought was rather unique given that it's very spacious. For underground passages, I believe I did roll for this one because I thought it would have been interesting if I had actually gotten something, but I actually rolled, I think, like a 3. So there are no significant passages underneath the capital, which was quite, I was actually a little bit disappointed in that. So I did decide to keep some notes so I could remind myself later down the line, but the capital is a floating city that's anchored to the ground with large chains, and a smaller city, which is everything that's outside the capital, it lies underneath in the valley below, and a series of elevators and pulleys actually take the denizens up to the floating capital itself. I'm kind of already thinking of how are people actually getting into the capital itself, and so that was actually quite the challenge, especially since we don't have access to floating ships just quite yet, and you'll kind of get a little bit of a hint later down when we get to the districts. But yeah, I had to think of ways of actually getting people in the capital itself. So for the governments and leadership, I straight up picked military officer or some sort of a military leadership role, because these Dragonborn were at war with other Dragonborn. So it's basically the chromatics versus the metallic, and that happened like centuries ago. It really didn't make sense to have anything else. And as such, I chose close-knit, so the communication is open and disagreements are constructive. I didn't really have time to have like any unease going within this capital, at least not for this one, because this, well, without spoiling it, I guess this is supposedly the group that was quote-unquote good during the War of the Dragonborns, but it's kind of complicated, as all things should be. So for the governing priority, I went ahead and put religious to go with the holy city type of ideal that I had. So the leadership is dedicated to a deity, which would be the dragons, and to following their tenets and core teachings. So there we go. It also gave me a temple district for one of the districts that I would have had to have rolled. For the priority reproach, they are peaceably strong, so an agreement stance is taken, preferring to avoid conflict whenever possible through negotiating and dealing for the best non-aggressive outcome. And that's something that they would have learned after the dragons had left them. For the priority success is mediocre. The Dragonborn have not been able to find any dragons on their crusades, so they've made very little headway on that. So it was either a choice between failing and mediocre, and I opted for mediocre because they are out there exploring. It's not like they're doing nothing. So for the new part of the capitals sheet is the leader's name, and there's spots for 3 of them. Since I have a military type leader, I only filled out 1, and his name is Tharian Torash. He is distinguished, his lifestyle rather is distinguished, and his residence is just a modest house, and that's just something that I rolled straight up on, and I actually rolled a 1 on that, and I believe I also rolled on his lifestyle as well, so those two fit quite well. I actually did not roll on the intent. I straight up just gave him genuine, and it didn't really make any sense that he would have some sort of negative deception. Like he didn't want that lifestyle, and he has some animosity towards that. So I just opted for genuine for that. And of course, if you have something like a council where there's more than one type of leader, then there's spots for those as well. But I only opted to take 1. There's also connections between other parts of the world, and so I actually chose 4, the maximum number here. And actually what I would really do, I would just take each of the prominent countries and make a connection with each of them. So I took the major ones here for these 4 and rolled their, let's see, I rolled for their relations. So for the other Dragonborn city, which I had not named by this video, is actually called Drakenfall Keep, or Drakengard Keep is what it is. And they are allies with reservations. So the entity is considered a friend but treated with care, possibly not fully trusted. They could be a friend yet to truly prove their loyalty, or one who is unpredictable or fickle. And I actually rolled 3 of those for 3 of the connections. So I have one for Humblewood / Furdenveld, which is on the continent of Esden. So, and I also got one for Tarnmire, which is the Leonid type country. The Tangle Wilds is also prominent, and I actually rolled enemy friendly. And if I remember correctly, when I originally rolled for that specific country, I actually did a capital sheet for the capital for Tangle Wilds. I'm pretty sure that they are also enemy friendly with the Dust Bloom, or whatever this country is called. I can't remember off the top of my head. So you also get some intrigue and espionage, which is, it was really cool when I rolled that for my Tangle Wilds location. For this one, I believe I did roll for this one. So for my spy network size, I got modest. The capital has up to a few spies working outside its borders. The infiltration depth is deep, although I kind of took the spying I took a different approach to the spying, at least for the Dragonborn. So their main concern, their main goal is to locate dragons or any dragon type artifacts. And so they're not really concerned with political intrigue, who's who in the other countries and what's going on, who's at war, or anything like that. So they're rather harmless. They're just looking for rumors that could lead them to finding where the dragons are. And surprisingly, I actually rolled none on the counterintelligence, so they don't have any counterintelligence going on within their borders. And of course, since there's none, the watchfulness is also skipped for that. And I kind of wrote some general notes that kind of went with the infiltration depth, and a little blurb about how they're just looking for dragons. So they're pretty much harmless. So you also get notable visitors. I don't really care too much about this because my players may or may not get here, but I did roll once, and it was a ruler type visitor, and they're there for diplomatic reasons. I didn't really concern myself with who specifically is there at the moment. If my players ever get here, then I will concern myself with that and tie that into the story. There is a military force. I chose that one. They were a warring race, basically, and so they kind of still stick to that, to keeping to that tradition, to making themselves better, to training so that they can actually survive out in the world. So they're always training and stuff like that. And the recruitment type is actually mandatory. They have to serve in some sort of a militaristic fashion, whether it's going out on a crusade or just joining the watch, something. They have to serve sometime. It's kind of like South Korea in a way, where all the males have to serve at least 2 years. So there's some real world significance to why I did that. The size of the force is strong. Specialization is defensive. They like shields and stuff like that. And their military facilities, simple structures, are outside of the city. Nobility is determined by their deeds. And there was a little blurb here about nobility. So if you don't want nobility, then you just basically do higher social standing. And that's kind of how I would approach this. There really isn't nobility here. It's basically what you do determines your status in a way. So like if you go on a crusade and you actually find a clue that points to where the dragons are, then your name is going to be up there. We also get relationships with the leadership. So those higher social people, they like the leadership. The relationship with the people is good, and they have a positive relationship with the people as well. It's kind of weird that they have two of those, but you could actually get, well, actually this affects whether it's positive or negative. So if I had rolled, let's see, if I rolled very bad, then the root of relationship to the people would be negative. So then what you would do is you would roll here on the root of relationship with the people. So I rolled, let's see, opinion of leadership. So when it comes to their opinion of the leadership, both sides, and if there's a positive disposition, then they agree. If there's a negative disposition within nobility, then they would actually disagree. So the people could either be in line with the nobility, or they could be kind of against it. Kind of like two different factions of the same people. So then we get to the community, which is step 3, and we have a lot of the same details here, just added on. So we have culture, which I opted to take self-improvement as a principle that the dragons would have taught them a long time ago. Their pursuit of the culture is of a keen interest. And we also get a population density, which is +1 from the age, which is dense, which actually gives me bonuses to my night activity. For the demographics, I did roll for this one, and it turned out only 2. 60% of a primary race and 40% of a secondary race. And of course, you would have visitors going by, which would kind of, fudge things up a little bit. Next, we have population wealth, which I did roll on, and I got affluent. I got a +6 from stewardship, which was actually pretty amazing. I actually rolled a 24 with the bonuses added. So I got affluent, which gives me -3 to the general crime. And then we get to the visitor traffic. So I have multitudes. So massive groups of people throng the streets, likely spilling out onto the roads outside the capital. Congestion is an ever-present reality and a regular issue, which really makes sense considering that space is very limited because you're a floating city. So I was actually really glad about that roll. And the disposition is actually friendly, which it worked out. I could have gone as low as unfriendly. Hostile, I probably would have just not have taken. So I'm glad I got friendly. And of course, the night activity, I get a +6 bonus. And so I actually rolled fairly low. I got active, which is okay. I mean, I don't really think clerics and paladins would like to party it up every night and every day. They'd be tub thumping. So for law enforcement, I get a +9 bonus, 8 from stewardship and 1 from leadership, and I got an extensive city watch. So these guys, they like to patrol. And it kind of makes sense because there's not a whole lot of room in the city, so it just naturally works that way. And for general crime, I got -3, which gives me a +2 to the urban encounter rolls. So I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time to explain the district roles because I don't think I did a great enough job explaining it in the cities video. So what you do here is you have your general conditions, which was impressive, the general crime, which was uncommon, and then the district condition modifier, which is a +1. So I actually get a +1 modifier to all district condition rolls. Take a look at your district condition modifier. So I'm at impressive, and so I roll a d20 for the district condition. So for the temple district, I rolled better. It was either better or far better because it went from impressive to magnificent, which is the highest tier, which gives a +2 to the quality mod. And then we take a look at the district condition crime modifier, which was, I believe, the district condition is magnificent, which gives me -2 to the crime mod. And then I do a district entry roll, which is a d12. And I got lightly guarded. So I get a +1 to the district crime roll, which is that +1 modifier right there. And then for crime, district crime, I just do a roll, a d20 roll with appropriate modifiers. And I believe we got infrequent. So I went from an uncommon priority to an infrequent. So here it is, the district urban encounter modifier. So from uncommon, I went one step below because I got better. So we went from uncommon to infrequent. So good overall, especially for the temple district. And then of course we roll for housing, which I got moderate. So a fair amount of the buildings in the district houses residents. And then for notable locations, it was just a straight roll. I got 2. And then of course I did this for each of the districts, which I only rolled for 3 districts. So I got a temple district, a market district, and an industrial district. And the industrial district is the only one that I chose. I got the temple district because we are a holy city. And so the only one that I really rolled was a market district. I opted to take the industrial district because of my plans for this particular capital and what I wanted to put inside of this district. So with the temple district, we get a great temple and archives, hired help scribes, priestly guidance, and hands of the divine. And then for the additional locations, I rolled an alchemist, which is notable for being magical, an apothecary for local loyalty, and of course a bathhouse because, you know, clerics and priests and paladins, they gotta be clean. They can't be stinky. Then for markets, we get baker, butcher, general store, smithy, and tailor. And for additional locations, I got a tavern, which is notable for being a meeting place, probably because it's going to be the only one in the entire city. We got ourselves a club, which I haven't determined what kind of a club it's going to be yet, and a bank and exchange. And then for the industrial, we get a smithy and a miller. And then for the additional locations, I actually went ahead and opted for something that wasn't on the list. I put docks, and you can see it says top secret machinery. And that's because these guys are actually working on the world's first flying ship. These guys are going to be somewhat technologically a little bit more advanced than the rest of the world, and so they're actually working on a flying ship, which kind of makes sense given that the other Dragonborn faction actually has a flying something, which you'll see in the next video. And I mean, their city's floating, so I mean, they have the capabilities to do so. But then I rolled general store and a foundry smelting, and that was all for the districts. There's room for 6 of them, and then of course you have some extra intrigue, which I don't like filling out beforehand. That's something that I like to get to when my players actually get there. But for the notes, I did include I included a link to my World Anvil, where I have a blurb about the Dragonborn as a species and some of the history behind that, which would help out for me at least. So that's kind of where I'm coming at when I came in and created this capital for this specific faction of the Dragonborns, which I believe is the Metallic Dragonborns. Feel free to leave a comment down below, give this video a huge thumbs up to support this series, and subscribe if you would like to see more. And I will see you guys in the next video.